I wanted to follow up on what we were just hearing about money because it's really important to remember that money actually is debt. Money is basically an IOU. And anybody can write an IOU. This is very important. When banks sort of wave their magic wand and produce money out of nothing to make you a loan, and of course they don't want you to know this. This is very important. They want you to think that there's some old widow who put her savings in the bank and they're giving you some of that, and if you don't give it back, she's going to be ruined and can't eat. But that's not true. They just made up the money. But anybody can make up an IOU. The secret of banking, right? Keynes pointed this out long ago, is they can make up as many IOUs as they want. Because say you go to the bank and say, oh, I got a hot tip on the horses, can I have 5 million pounds? And they say, sure, why not? And give you 5 million pounds. Well, what are you going to do with that 5 million pounds? You're really going to bet it on the horses, right? But say you win, or say you lose, whatever you're going to do, you're going to put the money in the bank. So ultimately, there's 5 million pounds goes out and 5 million pounds goes back in. So on their ledgers, they break even. If there's only one bank, that would be true. But, overall, banks sort of exchange with each other. And in fact, that's what kind of went wrong in 2008 and the whole system collapsed. They were all cheating each other so much that they didn't actually believe each other when they said they could cover each other's debts like that. So, like even the bankers didn't believe other bankers and the whole thing was about to collapse. But that's sort of another story. So the point is that anybody can write an IOU. In fact, say 300 years ago, in this neighborhood, there were probably every shop had its own money because it took a really long time before they printed enough coins that people could buy stuff in stores. Mostly everything was written in ledgers and debts and everybody had a tab. But often, if you came in and you bought some bread and you actually had a coin, they'd give you some leather token or a wooden token, and it was good in that store, right? For change, because nobody had change. It took, because they had to print millions and millions of coins. It took a long time. So everybody issued coins. There was things like widow currency. Old widow who would darn socks for people would issue little chits, and you wanted to help them out, you'd take it and use it as money. So there was a time that anybody could make their own money, but they made that illegal. And this is a key element in modern money. And the key thing here is taxes, right? Well, this is important to remember that if you don't believe that debt is money, look at some money, right? And what does it say? Here's the queen, and the queen says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of 20 pounds, right? So this is not 20 pounds. This is a promise to pay 20 pounds from the queen. So the queen owes you 20 pounds. Now, that means that you can give it to the queen if you owe her taxes, and it cancels out. That's how the Bank of England was actually created. The Bank of England was based on a loan. I think King William the something, I don't remember, wanted to fight a war in France. It's always military debt, right, that gets monetized. He wanted to fight a war in France, so he went to some merchants and they lent him 1.2 million pounds in silver. And he said, okay, I will pay you this back someday, maybe, I don't know. But in the meantime, I will give you the right to lend my debt to other people in the form of banknotes. So this was great for the bankers, right? This became the Bank of England. This was great for the bankers, but they were charging interest to the king. But they also charged interest to the people they lent it to. So they were just raking it in, right? But this is the system we still have. If you ever paid back the loan to the king, or the queen now, there would be no money. The whole system would collapse. Our entire financial system is based on an unpayable debt. And it continues in this way. So taxes are what takes the money that banks can create and makes it legitimate, because any of us can write IOUs, but you can't use those to pay taxes. The bank loans, the bank IOUs, you can use to pay taxes. And also anything else in court. In American money, it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. It means you can pay debts with it if they fine you or something, or if you have a legal contract, you can use that. But any old IOU probably won't do. So that's the way the system works. Taxes really exist not so the government can get money, because the government can print all the money they like. The taxes exist so that the government can take bank money and make sure that's the only IOU that actually works. So the whole system is totally different from what they say. The other thing is accounting identities, and this is really important to remember. The total amount of public and private debt balances out. I mean, there's other factors. There's foreign debt. I won't go into the whole thing. There's a difference in corporate and household debt. But like, imagine there was just public and private, just to make it simple. That means that if every pound of the government debt they pay off, there has to be a pound of private debt created. It's actually a perfect balance. If I had the diagrams here, I don't usually like diagrams, but imagine, you know, a chart like this showing like the fluctuations of public debt, and another one on the bottom which is exactly the same showing private debt. That's what it looks like. It's called an accounting identity. It has to match, and that means that as soon as the government pays off its debt, private debt has to go up. The only way they can like balance the budget is if you can't, which is really interesting because the entire idea of austerity is to convince you it's the other way around. It's not just wrong, it's actually backwards. You know, the more they pay off their debt, the less you can pay off your debt. So government's nothing like a household. And it's tricking you into this sort of magical thinking whereby if, you know, oh, these are debts our children will have to pay someday. It's complete nonsense. You know, it's not like the king ever paid back his debt from the whatever war in France he was fighting in 1692 when they created the Bank of England. In fact, he can't. You know, if they pay back debts, as you pointed out, the economy would collapse. There'd be no money. So this is really important to remember. Now, the people running the system, well, it depends on who they are. Politicians don't actually know this. Positive Money did a survey of MPs and discovered that I think 92% of them actually think money is created by the mint. They don't know any of this. They don't know where banks create money. So even the political class is so, you know, internalized their propaganda, they don't believe, you know, they have no idea how the economy actually works. In the meantime, we have the Bank of England actually issued a report like 3 or 4 years ago where they said, actually, no. You know, the entire basis of austerity, it's not true, it's false. Banks create money by making loans. All that stuff they teach you in Economics 101, it's not right. So they admitted that, but nobody paid any attention, and they just carried on pretending that this wasn't the case. But the implications of this are enormous. You know, we can make up money. Money is just promises that we make to each other. And this is the key thing. All a debt is a promise. It has no moral difference than any other promise. You know, and under normal circumstances, this is the real point of my 500-page book on debt. So the punchline is, you know, society itself is just a bunch of promises we make to each other. So is money. That's all it is. But normal promises, you know, if I promise to meet you at 5 o'clock, and then my mother dies, you're not going to expect me to show up, right? You know, we readjust those promises when circumstances change. And rich people, that's still true, right? If rich people lend each other a lot of money and then, you know, something happens, the economy collapses, there's a crisis. You know, if you're Donald Trump, they'll say, oh, never mind. You know, they'll wipe it out. And he's gone bankrupt how many times? 5? Yeah. Yeah. You know, they bailed them out all the time. You know, even in 2008, they bailed out American Insurance Group. They bailed out all the huge banks that said they're too big to fail. They didn't bail out mortgage holders. Well, why is that? It was really interesting because the money was, the bad debt was based on bad mortgage loans. If they just paid the mortgage owners and bailed them out, that money would have gone to the banks and bailed out the banks. Instead, they chose to bail out the banks directly and leave the mortgage holders, you know, dangling in debt. Why was that? Because they don't want you to know any of this. They don't want you to know that, like, debts can easily be renegotiated anytime they like. It's not a problem. They do this for each other all the time. But they want you to think that this is some absolute moral obligation, even though they don't think it's an obligation to each other at all. They readjust this stuff all the time. So this is an important thing to remember. Do I have like 30 seconds?
Yeah, of course you have 30 seconds.
Okay.
So.
I was involved in a group called Strike Debt after Occupy Wall Street, after they evicted us. We wanted to find a theme. We found that like debt was this pressing issue that defined every aspect of society. And I don't know the UK case as well, and I'm learning a lot from here, but I really think it's very important we think about this because it permeates our lives in ways we don't realize. For example, one of the most unexpected things I found was the case of Ferguson, Ferguson, Missouri. The famous case where they had like this incredible racist police enforcement where they were just locking basically every black person in the city had some sort, which was most of the city, had been arrested at least once and had outstanding warrants, and they were just constantly making the laws as complicated as possible so you'd miss your court date for a traffic ticket and be locked up. It turns out that the police were basically extracting money from the poorest parts of the population to pay the debt, because the amount that they got in fines every year was exactly equivalent to the municipal debt of Ferguson. So the police were basically paying off the city debt by shaking down the most vulnerable people, basically people who didn't have lawyers. That was the way, they figure if you're black, you don't have a lawyer, so they can just round you up and extract the money. And they just put them in jail and say, okay, you owe us $500 for that broken tail light. And, after a week, if he could get the family to pay, so okay, $250. And they'd like negotiate until they got as much money as they thought the family had. And they just do this to everybody regularly. This is the way policing works in America, and increasingly in other places once municipal debt takes hold. In New York, at one point the cops were mad at the mayor, so they went on strike, and they said that they were only going to do essential police work, which basically meant they were only going to fight crime, which is about 5% of what they do. But they just didn't harass people and round them up to do fines to pay off the city debt. So the city, income collapsed. It was the most effective police strike ever. So this shows you that underlines a lot of what's going on, a lot of the other abuses in societies in ways we don't even know. And the other thing about debt is it makes everyone ashamed. And this is everyone thinks that this is something that happened to them. But in fact, everyone you're sitting next to is in the same situation. There's no one who isn't actually involved in the artificial creation of debt, because that's how our economy works. Basically, the way our economy works is rich people bribe politicians to create policies which are intentionally calculated to put people in debt. It's the same way that most banks actually nowadays make most of their money off fees and penalties. So what they do is they make the rules so complicated that they know a certain percent, usually a majority of people, will make mistakes. And then they say, what? Not our fault if you can't balance your checkbook, And they fine you and extract the money. And that's their main source of profit. Similarly, they're constantly calculating how to make up rules that seem reasonable, but which will make sure that everyone ends up in debt. And then they sell the debt to each other. So when they say we have a finance economy, what finance means is other people's debts. They're just sitting around artificially creating debt and then trading with each other little cards, and that's called finance. Now, what is the best way to conduct civil disobedience against finance capital? This was a problem that we had, and I could, since I'm basically out of time, I could tell the whole story, but essentially what we discovered is everybody's already doing it. The way to do civil disobedience against finance capital is not to pay your debts. But pretty much every family is thus engaged in civil disobedience against finance capital, because everybody's not paying something, whether it's student loans, whether it's credit card loans, whether it's a mortgage. I mean, everyone's in default. Pretty much every family in America, certainly, and I imagine it's the same here, is actually engaged in it. So the question is how to bring us together and coordinate this into a form of economic power. And I think that's why things like this are really, really important.
Thank you.